Welcome to your deep dive. You shared an interest in how soil, specifically the mineral Birnessite, impacts carbon storage, and that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're going to unpack a scientific paper from ACS Earth and Space Chemistry, published in 2024 by Oyetunji and their team. The title is Temperature and pH Affect the Sorption and Transformation of Dissolved Organic Carbon by Birnessite. Buckle up, because it turns out there's a lot more going on beneath our feet than meets the eye.
It's true. And what's really fascinating is that this study reveals some pretty surprising things about how Birnessite, a type of manganese oxide, influences the carbon cycle.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is Birnessite and why is it important in the grand scheme of things?
Birnessite is a mineral found in soils.
Mhm.
And while it's not as common as some others, it plays an outsized role in how carbon is stored and cycled. It's like a hidden powerhouse, quietly influencing the fate of carbon in the environment.
So it's not just about the amount of a mineral, but its specific role, right? Like how it interacts with carbon.
Exactly. And that's where this study gets really interesting. Oyetunji and their team found that Birnessite might be even more important for carbon storage than we previously realized.
All right, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this study. How did they go about investigating Birnessite's impact on carbon?
They designed a clever experiment to mimic real-world soil conditions. They used vermicompost as their source of dissolved organic carbon, which is basically the carbon-rich stuff released as organic matter decomposes.
Vermicompost. So worm poop science can be surprisingly down to earth sometimes.
It certainly can. They chose vermicompost because it's an excellent source of that dissolved organic carbon, and they wanted to see how Birnessite would interact with it under different conditions. So they tested two different pH levels, one acidic and one alkaline, to simulate different types of soils. They also tested two temperatures, 25 and 50 degrees Celsius, which represent a range of environmental conditions.
That makes sense. By testing different pH levels and temperatures, they're getting a much more realistic picture of how Birnessite behaves in various environments. So what did they find? Was Birnessite a carbon magnet in all the conditions?
Well, that's where things took an interesting turn. It wasn't a simple case of Birnessite grabbing onto carbon equally across the board. The pH level turned out to have a huge impact on how much carbon the Birnessite could hold.
So pH matters. Which pH level was the carbon storage winner?
The acidic environment was far superior. At a pH of 4, Birnessite was incredibly effective at grabbing onto carbon. But when the pH was bumped up to 8, making it more alkaline, Birnessite wasn't nearly as effective. And here's where it gets even more interesting. At that higher pH, increasing the temperature actually made it worse at holding onto carbon.
That's unexpected. I wouldn't have guessed that temperature would have such a dramatic effect. This finding must have some pretty big implications for how we think about carbon storage in different ecosystems, right?
Absolutely. It suggests that soils in naturally acidic environments like peatlands or forests might be playing an even bigger role in carbon storage than we realized, thanks in part to the presence of Birnessite.
That's good news for those ecosystems. But what about places where the soil is more alkaline, like agricultural fields? Does this mean they're inherently bad at storing carbon?
It's not that simple.
Yeah.
This finding raises a lot of questions about how we might manage soil pH in agriculture to enhance carbon sequestration. It's an active area of research, and the answers could have significant implications for mitigating climate change.
That makes sense. This is already reminding me of why I was so fascinated by your work in the first place. You're showing how soil and mineralogy, something we often take for granted, is directly linked to something as crucial as the carbon cycle.
It's all interconnected, and that's what makes this research so compelling. But we've only just begun to scratch the surface of what Oyetunji and their team uncovered. There's another fascinating aspect to this study. It turns out Birnessite doesn't just hold on to carbon, it actually transforms it.
Okay, now we're getting into the really interesting stuff. What does it mean that Birnessite transforms carbon? Is it some sort of soil alchemy?
You could say that Birnessite has the ability to encourage the formation of more complex, stable carbon compounds, specifically aromatic and phenol compounds.
All right, break it down for me. What's so special about these aromatic and phenol compounds? Why does it matter what kind of carbon compounds are being formed?
These complex compounds are much less likely to decompose and release carbon back into the atmosphere. They essentially become locked away sometimes for very long periods of time.
So it's not just about capturing carbon, it's about transforming it into a form that's less likely to escape back into the atmosphere. Birnessite is like a carbon vault, trapping it in a secure, long-term storage system.
That's a great way to think about it. And there's even more to the story. Oyetunji's team found evidence of ester and ether formation processes we usually associate with laboratories, not the natural world. The fact that these are happening in the soil facilitated by Birnessite is quite remarkable.
Hold on, lab-like processes happening in the soil. I'm suddenly picturing tiny beakers and Bunsen burners down there amongst the roots. This is making me realize that soil is a far more dynamic and complex environment than I ever imagined.
It really is. And we're just beginning to understand the full extent of the chemical reactions and transformations taking place beneath our feet.
This is already blowing my mind, but you hinted earlier that there's even more to this story. You mentioned that Birnessite is a bit of a shapeshifter. What did you mean by that?
Well, as if things weren't interesting enough, the study found that Birnessite itself can change depending on the conditions. At the acidic pH and the higher temperature, it partially transformed into a different type of Birnessite called hexagonal Birnessite.
Hexagonal Birnessite. Is it literally changing shape, like morphing into a hexagon? I'm trying to picture this.
It's not a visible shape change, but its crystal structure is modified at a molecular level. Imagine rearranging the building blocks of the mineral.
Hmm.
They also observed small amounts of other manganese minerals forming like manganite and ramsdolite.
Wow, so it's not just the carbon that's transforming, the Birnessite is transforming too. It's like a dynamic duo down there, constantly adapting and changing in response to their environment.
That's exactly right. And these mineral transformations have big implications for how we understand soil formation and evolution over time. They also impact the soil's ability to store carbon and other nutrients in the long term.
Okay, this is getting incredibly complex. We've got carbon transforming minerals, transforming different pH levels, varying temperatures. It's like an intricate dance routine happening beneath our feet.
Yeah,
I think we need a moment to process all this amazing information.
I agree. There's a lot to unpack here, and we've only just begun to explore the implications of these findings.
All right, I think I've caught my breath. So we've established that Birnessite is a bit of a rock star when it comes to carbon storage. But I'm curious about how the researchers actually measured all of these transformations. Did they have tiny microscopes tracking individual carbon atoms as they morphed into these complex compounds?
That would be amazing to see, wouldn't it? While we can't observe those transformations directly, Oyetunji and their team used some incredibly sophisticated techniques to analyze what was happening at a molecular level. They use things like X-ray absorption spectroscopy, which allows them to study the arrangement and bonding of atoms within the samples.
It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. What kind of insights did these high-tech analyses provide?
They gave us even more evidence that Birnessite is a major player in carbon transformation. For instance, they observed an increase in the proportion of aromatic carbon in the soil samples after they reacted with Birnessite.
You mentioned aromatic carbon earlier, but I need a quick refresher. Why is aromatic carbon so important in the context of carbon storage?
Aromatic carbon refers to carbon atoms arranged in a very specific way, forming ring-like structures. These ring structures are incredibly stable, making them much harder for microbes to break down. So when Birnessite facilitates the formation of aromatic carbon, it's essentially locking that carbon away for a very long time, preventing it from being easily released back into the atmosphere.
Ah, so it's like Birnessite is helping to create these super durable carbon compounds, ensuring that the carbon stays put. But how exactly does it do that? How does Birnessite encourage those transformations to happen?
It's still an area of active research, but it appears that Birnessite acts as a catalyst, speeding up chemical reactions that wouldn't happen as readily or at all without its presence.
So it's not directly forcing those carbon atoms to bond in a specific way, but it's creating an environment where those transformations are more likely to occur.
Precisely. It's facilitating those interactions, nudging them along.
Hmm.
And it's not just about forming those initial bonds. Birnessite also seems to encourage the cross-linking of those carbon compounds, creating larger, even more stable structures.
So instead of just individual carbon compounds, we're now talking about complex, interconnected networks of carbon, all thanks to Birnessite's matchmaking skills. It's like it's weaving a carbon tapestry that's resistant to decomposition.
That's a wonderful analogy. But remember, we also talked about how Birnessite itself can transform under certain conditions. Specifically, the study found an increase in hexagonal Birnessite, especially at the higher temperature.
Right, the shape-shifting mineral. So it's not just a static player in this process. It's adapting and responding to the environment around it. That has to impact how it interacts with carbon, right?
Absolutely. Birnessite's transformation influences its ability to interact with carbon compounds, further adding to the complexity of the soil environment. It's a constant interplay between mineral and organic matter, each influencing the other.
This is making me realize that soil is a far more dynamic and responsive system than I ever gave it credit for. It's not just a passive substance. It's a constantly evolving environment with intricate feedback loops and interactions.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of everything in the soil.
Mm.
But there's a bigger picture here that we need to address. Why should we care about these transformations, especially if they're happening underground where we can't see them?
That's a great point. It's easy to overlook what we can't directly observe. What's the connection between these microscopic changes, the larger issues we're facing like climate change?
This is where the research becomes particularly relevant. Soil is a massive carbon reservoir, and if we can figure out how to manage soils to optimize carbon storage, it could be a game changer in our fight against climate change.
So it's not just about reducing our emissions, it's also about harnessing the power of natural systems like soil to sequester carbon.
Exactly. And this research suggests that understanding the role of minerals like Birnessite is key to unlocking that potential. It's like discovering a hidden superpower within the soil.
It's amazing to think that something as seemingly simple as dirt could hold such potential for solving global challenges. But I have to admit, I'm a little overwhelmed by all the different factors at play here. We've got different types of Birnessite, various carbon compounds, pH levels, temperatures. How can we even begin to grasp the implications of all this complexity?
It is a lot to take in, but that's the beauty of scientific research. It helps us to peel back the layers of complexity and understand the intricate workings of our world. And in this case, it's showing us that soil is not just dirt. It's a living dynamic system that plays a vital role in regulating our planet's climate.
I'm starting to see soil in a whole new light. It's not just a passive substance, it's a complex, interconnected web of life and chemical reactions. And it holds immense potential for addressing some of the biggest challenges we face.
And remember, we haven't even touched upon all the other minerals present in the soil. Birnessite is just one piece of the puzzle. Who knows what other hidden processes are waiting to be discovered?
That's a great point. It's like we've been focusing on a single tree and just realized that we're standing in the middle of a vast forest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And each type of mineral might have its own unique contributions to make. Some might be better at capturing specific types of carbon compounds, while others might excel at transforming carbon into those long-lasting, stable forms.
So it's not just about the quantity of carbon stored, but also about the quality, so to speak. We need to understand which minerals are best at creating those long-term carbon sinks if we want to leverage the power of soil to mitigate climate change.
That's precisely what researchers are starting to explore. It's about taking a more holistic approach, recognizing that soil is a dynamic ecosystem that can be managed to benefit both the environment and food production.
It's giving me hope that we can find solutions to climate change that work with nature rather than trying to control it. But I'm also realizing that there's still so much we don't know about the world beneath our feet.
Absolutely. And that's what makes science so exciting.
Hmm.
It's a continuous process of discovery and exploration, and often those discoveries lead to unexpected solutions for the challenges we face.
Speaking of discoveries, didn't the researchers also find evidence of other manganese minerals forming during the experiment? They mentioned manganite and ramsdolite, right?
They did. And that finding suggests that the soil environment is even more dynamic than we initially thought. It's not just Birnessite doing its thing in isolation. It's a whole community of minerals interacting and responding to each other and the organic matter around them.
So it's like a complex dance routine down there with different partners switching places and influencing the overall choreography. But if these other manganese minerals are forming from Birnessite, does that mean the Birnessite is disappearing?
Not necessarily disappearing, but transforming. The total amount of manganese might stay relatively constant, but the way it's distributed among different minerals can shift over time in response to environmental conditions.
And those shifts can impact how effectively the soil stores carbon.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's a complex web of interactions,
Yeah.
and we're only beginning to unravel the threads.
Well, this has been an incredibly illuminating journey into the hidden world of soil. I started this deep dive thinking it would be all about dirt and worms, but it's turned into so much more.
It's amazing how something so seemingly simple can be so complex and have such profound implications.
We've learned that soil is a dynamic living system teeming with minerals that play a crucial role in capturing and transforming carbon.
And we've seen how pH and temperature influence those processes, highlighting the importance of understanding soil conditions for optimizing carbon sequestration.
We've also glimpsed the vast potential of soil as a natural climate solution, inspiring us to explore new ways to manage this precious resource.
But perhaps the most important takeaway is that there's still so much we don't know. What other hidden processes are waiting to be discovered in the ground beneath our feet? What other secrets does the soil hold that could help us address the challenges of the 21st century?
That's a great question to ponder, and one that scientists around the world are actively investigating. We've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating field.
So the next time you walk across a field or dig in your garden, take a moment to appreciate the complexity and wonder of the soil beneath you. It's not just dirt. It's a living laboratory full of potential.
This has been The Deep Dive. Thank you for joining us on this exploration, and we encourage you to keep digging deeper into the fascinating world of soil and its role in shaping our planet's future. As we've been talking about all these intricate processes happening in the soil, it struck me that this study focused on just one type of Birnessite, the triclinic kind. What about all the other types out there?
That's a great observation. And it's a question that researchers are actively exploring. We're just beginning to appreciate the diversity of Birnessite, and each type likely has its own unique properties and impacts on carbon storage.
So could it be that triclinic Birnessite is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the carbon storing potential of these minerals? Are there other types of Birnessite out there that might be even more effective?
It's certainly possible. This study opens up a whole new avenue of research, prompting us to look more closely at the role of soil mineralogy in carbon sequestration beyond just this one type of Birnessite.
It's like we've been looking through a keyhole and suddenly realized there's an entire house beyond that door. What are some of the things researchers are looking at now that this door has been opened?
Well, one area of focus is exploring how different types of Birnessite and other manganese oxides interact with various carbon compounds. Each mineral might have its own preferences, so to speak. Some might be better at grabbing onto certain types of carbon, while others might excel at transforming carbon into those superstable forms we discussed.
That makes sense. It's not just about how MUCH carbon the soil can hold, but also about the types of carbon compounds that are being formed and how long they'll stick around. And that's where understanding the specific roles of different minerals becomes crucial.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting from a climate change perspective. If we can figure out which minerals are best at creating those long-lasting carbon sinks, we might be able to develop strategies to enhance those processes in the soil. Imagine if we could manage soils to favor the formation of those superstable carbon compounds, essentially locking away carbon for centuries.
So it's about working with nature, not against it. Instead of just planting trees, which is incredibly important, we might also be able to focus on nurturing the soil itself, cultivating the right mix of minerals to maximize carbon storage. It's like we're shifting from thinking about soil as just a passive medium to seeing it as an active player in climate change mitigation.
That's a powerful shift in perspective, and it's one that this research really highlights. It's about taking a more holistic approach, recognizing that soil is a dynamic ecosystem that can be managed to benefit both the environment and food production.
It's inspiring to think that something as seemingly simple as BERT could hold so much potential for helping us address climate change. And it's a reminder that there's so much more to discover about the world beneath our feet.
Absolutely. Every time we delve deeper into the soil, we uncover new layers of complexity and find new questions to ask. This is just the beginning of our understanding of the intricate relationships between minerals, carbon, and the soil environment.
Well, this deep dive has certainly opened my eyes to the fascinating and often overlooked world of soil. I started this conversation thinking about dirt and worms, and we've ended up exploring cutting-edge science with implications for the future of our planet.
It's amazing, isn't it? It just goes to show that there's wonder and complexity to be found everywhere, even in the most seemingly mundane things.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with me today. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the ground beneath my feet.
It's been my pleasure. I'm always thrilled to share my passion for soil science, and I hope this conversation has sparked your curiosity to learn even more.
It definitely has. This has been The Deep Dive, and we hope you've enjoyed this exploration into the hidden world of soil and its role in shaping our planet's future. We encourage you to keep digging deeper, keep asking questions, and never underestimate the power of the ground beneath your feet.